All right. Hello today. My name is Angela Pilcher, and I am the Executive Director of Unite Homeschool. And I am really excited to be on today and hosting Keri Singleton and Britt Singleton. They are the head of school, and they lead Living Science here in Canton, Georgia. And so we have all sorts of great stuff to discuss. As I've been working in the homeschool community for the last number of years, I've seen an interesting trend here recently where we have a lot of new homeschoolers who have decided to take ownership of their children's education, which is fantastic. I love seeing the enthusiasm as parents decide to be more intentional with their homeschooling of their kids. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about you guys with Living Science and what y'all are doing, and then we can talk more about homeschooling in general. Britt, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your role there at Living Science?
Well, I would say if I could describe myself, it would be I'm an accidental homeschooling dad. If you had asked me years ago if we were going to be a homeschooling family, I would have said, that's kind of weird. No, because I had this vision of having to add a room onto my house and put chalkboards at the front and a row of desks, in the room for my 4 kids, and a teacher's desk up front with an apple on it, just like a traditional school moved under the roof of our house. And through just the Lord's timing and a very fortuitous series of events, I actually lived with some friends in the Kansas City area when we were making a move across country, and I saw how they homeschooled and how well mannered and how knowledgeable their kids were about a host of topics. And so I called my wife up and said, maybe we should consider homeschooling. And then, years later, here we are, and we're now I'm the head of school, and she's the chief of staff at Living Science Academy, which is a home science or a home studies organization in Woodstock, Georgia. And we love it. And we would, if I had to do over again, I would not have changed a thing, except maybe started sooner.
So, yeah, so here at Living Science, we partner with the parents, the homeschooling parents, to provide classes that maybe they don't want to teach at home, like biology or, high level maths or whatever. So every kid here starting in middle school has to take science, but then after that, everything's a la carte. So if your kid, you just don't want to buy that $600 microscope, then they can take science here, but want to own all of your other your other classes subjects, you can do it at home, or you can do any number of classes here. And we have kids that do everything from just science to taking 6 classes. It just doesn't really matter. And that's what's kind of special about our place and makes us a unique niche here in the homeschool community that we live there in North Georgia. So.
Yep. And just to touch on that, we've been to multiple conferences now, and we have yet to meet, out of the dozens and dozens of other not homeschool, but Christian school leaders that we have met from around the country, we have yet to meet someone who leads a school with a model like ours. We hear about the university model, we hear about the 2-day-a-week model, but we haven't met anyone who runs an organization that is like Living Science. I think you're muted, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really great that you guys focus on science, because there are a lot of parents who are afraid of that higher level science. Maybe they're okay with doing nature studies in elementary school, but when you start looking at dissecting a shark in your kitchen, you get a little intimidated.
Yes.
Yep.
So yeah, that's fantastic. So what do you notice about the new wave of homeschoolers that have started? Are you finding that they have established clear goals, or are they maybe running away a little bit more than they used to?
I think one of the things that we see here is people want to homeschool their kids, or they like the idea of homeschooling, having their kids at home, being able to focus the education on what their kids likes are, or to teach them in the way with their own family values and not having to unteach what the schools are teaching. But sometimes they jump into it with really not having an idea of what that looks like or even what they really want. And so that's probably what we see as the biggest challenge for homeschooling families these days, is if they, and you can certainly jump in and get started and do things, but it's really good to kind of sit down and say, okay, what's my overall goal with this? Do I just want my kids to have this amazing academic education, or do I want to tailor it to them? Or maybe they have, a learning style that doesn't work with sitting in the classroom for 8 hours. How can I do that? And then also, it's for the parents, they have to almost unlearn or be deprogrammed from what we would think of as public education today. You have to sit in a desk, like Britt said earlier. Is like, I thought I had to add a room onto our house and have desks and my kids sit in rows. And I think, from day to day, if people came in our house, they wouldn't even, they would think it's chaos, because our kids were everywhere doing school, maybe on a yoga ball, maybe on a mini trampoline, sitting under the table. But what really worked for us and continues to work for us, because we still are homeschooling 2 of our 4 kids, 2 of them are in college and 2 are still in high school, is that figuring out that freedom, like figuring out for them what works best. My kid, one of our daughters, she didn't like to do math until 9 o'clock at night. It wasn't that she didn't like it. It's just, it didn't work for her. She fought it and it struggled, but it's kind of like 9 o'clock came and we could do math in an hour or less, whereas we could have spent 4 hours earlier. So once we figured that out and gave that up, you have to give up that, no, this is a rigid schedule, then it really works for parents.
And I want to add on to that, just because you don't necessarily have a rigid or a normal 9 to 5 schedule, that doesn't mean that you don't need to be very deliberate and very planful in your homeschooling efforts. I liken it to, my boys and I, we've been very active in Trail Life USA, and I liken it to going into the woods. Have a plan for the type of adventure in the woods you want to have, or you'll end up getting lost in the woods. If you're going to go out for a 3-mile hike, you kind of pack for that. If you're going to go out for a 10-mile hike, you kind of prepare for that. So I love one of the things that my wife always says is, have them potty trained by 5, have them reading by 10. That's a good plan to start out with. That's a really good plan to start out with. And then you sort of fill in the details around that. And there's so many different amazing curricula that are out there that will vary from family to family and even from kid to kid. It's a totally new day in homeschooling with the internet and with all the communities and the community organizations that have sprung up around the country to support the individual family homeschooling. There's really so much more now out there, and it does involve quite a bit of shopping and looking around to find just the right thing, but it is out there. Somebody else has probably done it, and they have put it together in a curriculum that a homeschooling mom that's really busy and is really put off or intimidated by the idea of designing her own curriculum, that she can find that and really copy and paste. And it gets better all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I remember starting out and feeling a little overwhelmed, and that was even quite a while ago now. And today's new mom probably does have even more to sift through. But what I love is that we get to pivot as we figure out it's not working for us. Mm-hmm. But what strategies would you guys suggest for new homeschool families, maybe to establish a clear goal for their homeschooling journey? Because if we don't know where we're heading, we can end up pivoting in circles and giving up.
Yeah, I think one is parents have to give themselves time, All right. We live in a society that wants everything now. And I fall into that, but finding your rhythm takes time. And some days are really hard, even when you found your rhythm. And some days are easier, just like a work, have a job or whatever. And so, God's mercies are new every morning, just like that, getting up every morning and saying, okay, yesterday was a horrible day. I was crying, the kids were crying. We're going to start over today. And, just really figuring out where that is. Like, I had a friend who they had breakfast and then they did their math, and no one left the breakfast table till math was done. And that worked for her family. And that was awesome. And that was the start of their rhythm. And then the kids went and they did their individual thing. And she always scheduled time throughout the day for each child to sit down with that kid as they were even growing up, to go over their homework or to help them with reading or whatever. And I think that that's really important. And to have the kids know each day, here's their expectation, whether it's today you're going to have to do these 3 subjects and do this much reading or whatever. And then the other thing that we sprinkled in we did it every day, but you can sprinkle in it, and which is really create some great family time, is family reads. Take a book that one of your kids is reading, and instead of them reading it alone, read it as a family, or listen to it as an audiobook, or have dad read it after dinner. We used to do something really funny, like we used to do something really fun at math facts at the table. Everybody, mom and dad, all the siblings, they got a sheet of math facts, and we would race to see who could get them done first. And that created with our kids this really cool bragging rights. Like, I beat mom today in my multiplication math facts, or I beat dad, and we would just do that once every couple of weeks, just as an added fun thing. And I think that created some space and some excitement around our days, and that made then the slog of some of the normal routine stuff that you have to do much better.
Yeah, I think there was the key word that Keri just mentioned is the D word, and that's dads. And I think that shouldn't surprise anyone that when dads are involved in something, it sort of leads the whole family. And all you dads out there, we know that when dads lead the family to church, the family goes to the church much more regularly. When the dad leads the family in their faith, the kids follow in that faith much more consistently. And the same goes with homeschooling. When the dad is present and active in homeschooling, then the kids naturally get behind mom's effort of the day to day. And that doesn't mean it's always easy. Certainly not. I think Keri would agree with that 100%. But that means that the family is united. And it's interesting that we're talking about unite homeschooling, today. But the family is united in their efforts, and the kids know that they have to sit and give their due time to mom's effort, and they have to sit and individually complete their assigned tasks, because dad will be asking, dad will be following up, and they don't want to disappoint dad.
It's true, and it's interesting because when I have set out on my own without consulting my husband about where we wanted to end up, it turns out often we're on different pages. And, I think having that unified goal where you've discussed it ahead of time, and you can look at each child individually and say, this one is likely to go and do something amazing and professional, and he might need to go to college, or this other one has no care to do that. And so you can adjust the day-to-day a little bit, not a lot, because obviously we all need them to do their best, but maybe that helps to alleviate a little bit of the felt pressure inside, if you can discuss them kind of with goals in mind, and understanding together that you're trying to get to the same place. I think that's fantastic.
100%.
I think I just want to add one thing is when you're talking about the pressure and how to get started, especially if you have kids closer in age, maybe at 2 years apart or a year apart, or even 3 kids within a 4 or 5 year range, it's, you can do history all together. You can do some, readings all together, family readings or history, and you just tailor what their expectations are for them to remember, for them to recall, or the assignments with them. But that really makes it easier on the parent, but it also makes it more fun because the kids can bounce off each other their ideas. The parents can talk about it at the dinner table. It makes it more of a family thing than just this kid's studying, ancient history. This kid's studying, the Civil War, and this kid's studying 20th century. It's more disjointed that way. Whereas if you're all doing the same thing, and so we have done that in the past as well, and just expected different levels of retention and home, classwork with that based on the age of the child.
That's right. Well, and we can begin to incorporate the children's unique learning styles within that family structure too, can't we? What have you learned about managing children's unique learning styles within your own homes and also within Living Science?
Well, I think that it's really important to first and foremost understand, be a student of your child's learning, right? And understand that they might learn very different from you. And thus we tend, as people, you tend to teach the way that you learn best. And so there's a lot of free, what's your learning style, what's your kids' learning style. You probably already know if the parents really thought about it and sat down and watched their child for a couple of minutes do something, they would be able to figure out, oh, my kid is really a visual learner, or they're an auditory learner, or, if I have to look them in the eye and have them write it down what their chores are, or, or else they don't get it, or they might need to actually play with Play-Doh and create something to understand a concept. Then they're a kinesthetic learner. So, or there might be some kind of variation of all these things. And even my kids know mine now, because they'll yell across the room, hey, Mom, I'm having trouble with this math problem. And they'll yell the math problem, like, I can't, I got to see it, And so now they'll bring it to me. And so, as you go through your homeschool journey, you figure this out about your kids, and then you can really tailor how they learn. And I would even suggest that you use all the learning styles you can in that lesson, in that thing, because they're going to need to learn how to learn. And sometimes one subject, one thing is they're better auditory, and another one they might be better visual, just depending on it. So that's there's stuff online for free. It's just watching. And this is where we talked about, don't be in a rush to just jump in and expect success right away, because part of that process is figuring out what works best for you and what works best for them, and trying to meld those together.
Absolutely.
So what do you think?
Yeah. You nailed it. I can think of multiple examples from our own kids where each of them are so unique that we, have the same experience, but each of them take away such different lessons from the exact same experience. And just like Keri said, being a student of your child and being willing to take a step back, and then step to the side and move forward a little bit different way, so that the kid may be able to get it just from the slight change in how you approach it.
Yeah. And here at Living Science, we encourage all the teachers the first couple of weeks of school, don't be so concerned about cramming curriculum. Do something that's lets you get to know the kids, figure out, what makes them tick, how they learn, and then incorporate those things in. So, maybe in like one of my middle school math classes, we do a lot of we're out of our seat, moving around. I'm throwing stuff at them in a good way, funny, and getting them walking around. Some of them write better. Some of them, some of them are on the floor, some of them are in their desk. And it's to a point where it doesn't disrupt everybody, but just figuring out really what makes them learn best, and then tailoring your teaching style to that, instead of forcing them to learn the way you're teaching. you really need to, as adults, it's easier for us to flex our teaching style to the kid that we're teaching.
That's right. Well, and it changes as they grow up too. I remember when we first started out, and I had, I have two boys, and they were both, they were very, very active. And there is no need for especially little boys, but kids in general, to try to sit down for hours. That's just not appropriate. And so I would move our phonics lesson or our math lesson outside, and we would do some sort of a game. I remember using chalk to draw on the sidewalk and draw letters and numbers. And I did one time, I went on Pinterest, and there's a lot of amazing, crazy ideas on Pinterest. And they were suggesting that you blow up some balloons, and then you write letters on the balloons, and then the kid has to, punch the balloon based on where which letter is facing them or whatever, and shout out the letter. Anyway, there's lots of ways to incorporate movement with learning. It just takes kind of some forethought and some planning. And I think those are the families that really fall in love with homeschooling, is the ones that can take a step back and think, how can I meet my child where I am with what we also need to do next, right?
Yeah, and I would think the other thing I would add to that is, I would say, you don't have to spend hours and hours and hours on something. Kids don't function well that way. Even if it's, especially the younger they are, the shorter the time period you need, and then change it up, like you said, take outside, throw them, doing different things. And, a lot of our kids were doing something else while we were reading, or while they were listening to something, whether it be thinking putty or Legos or whatever, drawing, coloring. Yep. And a lot of times, even when I was teaching them, they would be doing something else. And at first you kind of have to, you're like, why aren't you paying attention? But they really are. That's just how they pay attention better. And I love that balloon idea. That was great. We used to do our boys learned all their math facts jumping on a mini trampoline. And to the point where, for a while, when they weren't jumping, they couldn't remember them. And then okay, back on the trampoline, and they would get it right away. I mean, it was, so it was a fun thing. But that also, I mean, they need movement, especially boys.
Yeah. And I think that also speaks to, we don't have cookie cutter kids. And we really try to avoid any sort of a cookie cutter approach at Living Science. And that's one of the first things that prospective parents hear, is that we don't believe in, categorizing your children. We believe that each child is unique and is blessed with a unique personality and a unique learning style. And we don't try to force them into a box. And so, we've seen that with our own kids, and we see it at Living Science with all the other kids that attend here, is that each one learns a little bit differently based on their age, personality type, and their learning style.
That's right. Yeah, I started out with reading to them while they were eating either breakfast or lunch, depending on the schedule of that day. And even now, they prefer that we do some of our read alouds during mealtime. And so I'll either kind of graze as I make lunch, or have a smoothie on the way, or whatever it is that I'm going to do for myself. But generally, we will at least start our read aloud while they're eating a meal. And then usually they're so engulfed in the book that they don't want to get up right away. They want to stay and hear some more. So, yeah. What role would you guys say that routine plays in maintaining focus and productivity in homeschooling?
Yeah, I'll let you handle that one, dear.
All right. Well, I think it's important for the kids to know the guidelines and their, we call them guardrails at our house. What that is, what the expectations are for each day. Some kids are really good at going with the flow, and some kids are better when they know the plan. And so we always kind of focused on here's the plan for the day. And once we kind of established, here's your plan, here's the schedule for the day, here's what else we have, because homeschooling every day looks different. This day we might have had homeschool gymnastics, and this day we might have had homeschool soccer, and this day trail life, or this day whatever. So that was always on the schedule and the calendar. And then we tried to stick to a routine, but we also, then once the kids got used to it, we were able to flex. I know I have a really good friend who she's homeschooled 4 girls. The oldest is going to be in 9th grade, or the youngest is going to be in 9th grade this year, so that she has some graduate. Every single Friday, they did Fun Friday. It was called Fun Friday every Friday, and it might have been a museum or art, going seeing some art or a show or hike or something fun, bowling, it didn't matter. It was always on a Friday, and they still to this day do Fun Fridays. And that routine, although different every week, it was always Fun Friday, really helped them to figure out. So they really only did school for, Monday through Thursday. For us, that routine changed every year. Some days, there might have been one day in the week where our kids were at Living Science for science for that day. So we didn't do a lot of other school, but maybe we picked up a Saturday morning where we moved one thing. And I think just that setting the expectation early, running through your schedule, and then letting them know, okay, well, we might deviate here or there, but always telling them ahead of time. I think that helps establish your homeschool, that helps them keep on task, and it helps to keep you as a teacher on top of what you want to accomplish at the end of the year with your kids, whether it's through this whole math book, or I'm going to do 160 lessons out of this math book, I'm going to skip these, how that works in your day to day. So.
Yep. And now it's to the point where our 2 remaining homeschool kids, our high school boys, they'll tell us the plans, like, hey, do you want to hear my plan for the day? And it can be something as simple as, I'm going to eat lunch, then I'm going to play with Legos for an hour, then I'm going to take a shower and get ready to go to work. So they're the ones they've learned that, and they're comfortable in planning out their day, and they want us to know this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the day. So it's really cool to hear them say that, hear them repeat the lessons back to us.
Sure. And Keri, what you were saying about how your friend had set aside Fridays for the fun, and then your school week sometimes differed. It makes me recognize how we all have slightly different priorities, and that doesn't mean that your schedule is better and hers is better. It just means that you guys had decided that trail life or soccer or living science were the primary priority. And so that was the big rock that you put in your week schedule. And this other mom that had Fridays off, it probably meant that they had to say no to a lot of other things during the week because they had set aside as a priority the Fun Friday adventure as a family. And so I love how both sides of that coin are equally important, and it just depends on which, what is it that your family, and it kind of goes back to that conversation with your husband, right, or your wife.
Yeah.
But you decide as a family, what is it that we want to prioritize for our family, and how are we going to make sure that our time aligns with that priority?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'd like to add that for us, some of our, using that phrase, the big rocks were because we're homeschooling, we have the flexibility to do anything we want to do, which means if we want to take a, work, vacation allowing, we'll load the family up and we'll take a 3-week road trip out to the Rocky Mountains. And, we still do, quote unquote school. Does it look like it does on a day-to-day basis? No, but the kids are still learning so much on the road. And because we have that built-in flexibility, we can do it without skipping a beat, and certainly without feeling guilty, and also without having to report back to anyone that's like, this is what we were doing. Is that okay? No, we don't need to ask permission. We are empowered. We empower ourselves as homeschooling parents to make the decision that's best for our family. And if that involves, a very rigid routine Monday through Friday, that's fine. Or if it involves throwing everything out the window and taking a road trip, that's also fine. You can do it. It's up to you.
Yeah. And I love those road trip ideas, but then we always have to come back and do math, don't we?
Well, you can work math into the road trip. How many miles have we driven on this? Let's take an odometer reading and do the subtraction to see how many miles we've gone on this trip.
That's right. So that kind of goes right into my next question, which was, how can new homeschooling families foster a love of learning while also balancing academic rigor?
Oh, I would say involve your kids, even at a young age. Instead of saying, we're going to do a nature study and we're going to study trees, say, hey, would you like to study trees, or would you like to study flowers? Or would you like to, or bugs, or what kind, ask them. And I think that is a big thing, giving them choices of two good choices, right? Instead of saying, well, what do you want to do? And then just kind of run there. That, there is a model of that called unschooling, but it's more of, I think it's really important that we do some nature studies. Well, here's some things we can do. And then as they grow older, we, like this next year, we gave our kid a choice. Do you want to take physics? Do you want to take anatomy, or do you want to take forensic science? Right? I mean, either of those are perfectly good choices. Let's look at where you want to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Which one of these is the best choice for you? And I think that's really important to kind of know that space that your kids live in, and what they love and don't like. I mean, yes, you always have to do math. You need to know how to read. You need to know how to, write. But can you do that in a way that teaches them that without it being so rigid or blocked out, where you might have a really good creative writer. So have them write stories, and then go back and say, well, how does this grammar work? Or how does this sentence structure work versus this person over here who hates to write stories, but they love to write reports on something in science. Okay, well then the same thing. So that's kind of how we would suggest people start out with that.
And that the word rigor, it's kind of become almost like a buzzword or a mantra that we hear more and more. And for kids who do have a desire and the ability to go on to a four-year university and get into the professions, whether it's medicine or law or whatever, we definitely want to show that they have academic rigor in their background. And we're fortunate to live in the state of Georgia, where we have so many dual enrollment options, that a kid in high school can take dual enrollment classes. We even have some dual enrollment classes here at Living Science that can definitely show that the student can succeed in a rigorous academic environment, and also with now being multiple options for the standardized testing, with SAT and ACT being the most common, but also now the CLT being more and more accepted. And I don't know this to be 100% certain, but I believe that the CLT is, homeschoolers gravitate more towards the CLT because of the nature of their learning. And more universities are accepting the CLT as a standardized testing option. A student who does well on the CLT does show that, again, that they have what it takes to succeed in a rigorous academic environment.
I think also too, when you foster a love of learning within your kids, doing so many different things and exposing them to all kinds of, going to museums or going to a nature center, going on a hike, and just taking what they see and learning it. I feel like sometimes we go places with our kids, and it's every environment. Everything is a learning moment. Everything is a teaching moment. And we fostered that in them, so that even now, like, we'll go to museums or we'll go someplace and they're reading all the signs and they want to know everything, and they're talking about something they've learned somewhere else because they've been able to learn how to put all these pieces together, and people flock to them or asking them, where did you hear that? Or what do you know about that? And then they're teaching them. And it's because they don't know that's how it's different. That's just all they've ever known. And so it just kind of comes, and that, academically, they are able to think outside the box and apply things in the real world so much better than just that book knowledge that you open a book and you study it, right? Yeah. So I think that when you capture their hearts for learning, then the rigor comes because they want to learn more.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen that play out within my own children's lives as well. And, as you were talking about kind of giving the kids options, it reminded me of Charlotte Mason's philosophy of a feast, right? A feast of ideas, a feast of books, and spreading that feast before the child and saying, these are all very good, lovely things. What would we like to dive into together today? And just giving them a little bit of authority to own their own learning, because ultimately we want them to own their education. But giving them a feast of great ideas is just really lovely. And that's one of the things I love about our library that Unite has, because we have 2,700 great ideas. There's more than anyone could read in one school year. And so just having the ability to bring the kids and say, I know that everything here is going to be good for you. What do you want to read next? Is such a privilege. And it's just such a wonderful resource that I love offering to the community.
Yeah. When we saw it, I was just blown away. I mean, I was like just pointing out book after book that we had read, or I loved, or my kids read and they loved. And it's a really cool resource. I remember diving through Homeschool, consignment sales, library book sales, looking online for all these books, and just spending hours doing that. And you guys just have a whole bunch of them there that people have donated. I think that's really neat. And that's what's so cool about the homeschool community, is if you allow yourself to really dive into the community, everyone wants to help everyone else. They want, I'd love to share with you everything I did wrong, right? And everything that I thought really works well. It might not work for you, or what I did wrong might really work well for you. But at least, my knowledge, I had older homeschooling moms pouring into me. I love pouring into the younger homeschooling moms and sharing everything that's going on with them. And I just think that that's what's really cool about the homeschool community, is everybody wants everybody to succeed. There's no competition for who's the best homeschooling mom out there. It's a very unique community that exists, and you just have to plug in. And there's so many places to plug in.
Yep, absolutely. And it starts just with somebody with an idea and some initiative, and a desire and the passion to follow through on that. And when we visited Unite Homeschool, it was clear that that's what you had, that you had all of those, you and your whatever you want to call it, your tribe or your posse. You really had some people that were committed to helping make it happen, not just for their own families, but for other homeschooling families in the area.
That's right. Yeah, our board of directors is fantastic. The mentor team is wonderful, and we actually have a whole volunteer army, it feels like, at times, where if we need something specific, when we put it out, generally there's 2 or 3 that are like, yeah, I got that. And so just having our network, we've been really intentional to try to give people the opportunity to get off of social media. And that actually allows for a lot more intentionality in their own lives. And And it's just been really great to allow the network to grow and mature into a really wonderful community.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah. Before we head out, are there any practical steps that you guys would recommend for families who maybe have gotten in and are feeling maybe a little overwhelmed, or they need to change or pivot in some way?
I think first and foremost is for so many of the new families, and I think that to some degree, Carrie and I were like this years ago as well. We were waiting for somebody to give us permission to homeschool. We were waiting for someone to affirmatively tell us this is okay. And we didn't need that. And new homeschooling families don't need that either. You don't need permission. Wives, go to your husbands. Husbands, go to your wives and say, what do you think about homeschooling our kids? Let's get together on this and make this a family priority. Just like you do with your finances, just like you do with your, vacation plans or whatever. But make it a very important priority for your family. And once you agree on that, it won't necessarily be easy, but the other pieces will fall in place. And then, especially for the moms, get with that community. Find those people who have been there, done that, and are willing to share their best practices and worst practices so that you can learn from both their successes and their failures.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if they're already in homeschooling and they bought this really expensive curriculum in a box, and they're trying to follow it and it's just not working, don't be afraid to pitch it. Just and I don't literally mean throw in the trash. I said sell it, give it to somebody else, give it to Unite Homeschoolers. There might be someone there who needs it. Try something different. Even if you only like one section, like, oh, I love the literature stuff, but I don't like the science, or I love everything but the history. Okay, go find another history. Just don't be afraid to move, to pivot and change, and from year to year, and even from kid to kid. And it's okay. And if you're saying, well, I need something that works for all my kids, then just pick topics that'll work for all your kids. And maybe you can say, okay, we're always going to do history together, or we're always going to do literature together. And maybe it's this older kid reading to the younger kid. Hand off some of the responsibilities as your kids grow up for them to help the younger ones. A lot of our girls, they did math with their brothers. Well, they help their brothers with grammar. It's good for them too. I would just say, don't be afraid to just, pick and choose what you're doing. Say, this is working, this is not working, and ask for help. No one thinks you're perfect. We're certainly not perfect. And everybody at one point in time has a good idea or needs a good idea. So that's what the community is all about.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I had an email conversation with our middle school history teacher yesterday, and she's a homeschooling mom who is also a teacher here at Living Science, and she had an encyclopedic, detailed knowledge of the different options for teaching middle school history to middle school kids. And I was amazed. That's just where she really is passionate. And just like her, there's dozens and hundreds of other homeschool moms in Cherokee County and the surrounding areas that have equally passionate feelings towards other topics. And if you can sit down with them, you will be amazed at the energy they bring when you just mention a topic, because they will know, like I said, encyclopedically what the different options are and the strengths and weaknesses of each. It really, as much as I have thought I knew and respected this middle school history teacher already, it was like an order of magnitude more, just because of how passionate and knowledgeable she was about the details regarding middle school history.
It sounds like she's teaching the right topic then. That's fantastic.
Yep.
That is great. Yeah, well, and getting that support, because as you said, you were waiting for someone to give you permission, and sometimes we need that reassurance for another mom to tell us that that what we're doing is great, but we don't need that, but yet it's helpful, especially when you're first starting out. And that's one of the things I love about our February. We do an annual retreat every February for moms. And so it's just a Friday, Saturday where we get together Friday afternoon and we don't go home till Sunday. And we don't do the cooking or the cleaning. Instead, we get to craft and laugh and talk, and we have encouraging workshops from our mentors, and we just make friends. But in the middle of all of that, it allows the moms to breathe and to be reassured that the things that they're doing at home really are worth it and really are working. And that annual retreat, we intentionally picked February because for a lot of families, it's the longest short month. And, you kind of get through the Christmas rush and you get back into school in January and it's cold and the kids can't go out and burn as much energy outside like they normally would. And it's just such a hard month. And so 2 things that I always do in February is I pick a really good read aloud and board game plan. And I go to an annual retreat because it's just helpful to get that last little push to make it to spring. And having that February thing to look forward to is really great.
I agree. That's awesome. That sounds good. They should all sign up.
It's true. There's only 30 spots. I think we're about half full at the moment. And it is right at a month from today. So it will be going out. The registration is live and it is filling up. So awesome. Well, I thank you guys for your time today. And when does enrollment begin for Living Science? And do you guys have open houses coming up?
I am so glad you said that. We have about one open house a month. The next one is coming up this Monday, the 27th. And that's from 7 to 9 at school. You can look for future open houses on the website, which is livingscience.com. And enrollment is open now for the fall semester for all grades.
Yeah.
Great. So, and you said that was a la carte. So they just take science plus the things that they're most interested in.
Thank you for allowing me to clarify. We have a set menu for elementary, and the set menu is a choice for K through 5. You can choose a half day, full day, or 2 full day option. But from 6th grade on up, once you're enrolled in science, it's a la carte after that.
Yeah. But our elementary program, it's science and tech and engineering is our half day. And then you'll add a couple other classes, English and math in the afternoon or for the full day. And then the second day is homework help and fun stuff, music, art, things like that. So.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for your time. I know you probably have class to get to here soon, so I'll let you hop off. But thank you both for coming on, and we love what y'all are doing there, and we're glad to be nearby.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much. And we love when the homeschool community supports each other and enriches and encourages each other, either electronically like this, over the internet, or in person, or over the phone, and certainly in prayer. So we thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to other opportunities in the future together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.